Good morning, church. How are you this morning? It's good to see you all this morning. I am not the Lee you are looking for, but I am the Lee that you got this morning. I'd like to start this morning with some thankfulness of my own. Since we're thinking about thankfulness already this morning, I want to thank you for your faithfulness and just being here this morning. You know, it's really easy to take for granted that you are here on a Sunday morning because for many of you it's just a habit, right? This is where you know you're going to be. But I have grown more and more to appreciate the faithfulness of people who choose to be with God's people on a Sunday morning, to worship and to think about God. So thank you for that. I want to thank this church for your faithfulness. You know, I'm still just kind of getting to know the West Main Church. Although I grew up on the west side of Fort Worth, I've heard about this church for many years, and I am very familiar with the stability and the faithfulness of this church to both support men to preach the gospel here and to support men to preach the gospel other places. And you know, I'm especially thankful for your investment in me and helping me to go to Ethiopia and to take the gospel to these brethren and to the parts of the world where they have never heard the gospel before. And I thank you for your confidence in me to take this word that God has given to us to people who desperately need to hear about Jesus. Thank you for your confidence in me, but thank you for your love of the kingdom, because the fact is, the work that I do is work that we're all a part of. It's kingdom work. We are trying to grow the borders of God's kingdom so that everyone will know King Jesus, because there is going to come a day when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, because that will be a reality that everyone will see. But until then, we are messengers. We are responsible. And I am thankful that this church has stood for that and has supported me in the work that I did in Ethiopia this year. When we went to Ethiopia, we were in country for about 11 days. We taught for about 8. We spoke to more than 1,000 people about Jesus. We went to 5 or 6 different locations. We made numerous contacts with people who had never even heard about Jesus. We passed out hundreds of Bibles, and we saw and we learned that the gospel is still very much powerful no matter where you go in the world. The gospel is not bound by limitations, by culture, by even our past experiences or our issues in life. The gospel is powerful because it doesn't change our circumstances now, but it gives us peace in something in the future. And so thank you for being part of that right along with me. I want to start my presentation about Ethiopia by asking you a question. Who is Jesus to you? At one of our stops, a coworker of mine, one of my Ethiopian coworkers, was sitting down to a man who had never obeyed the gospel, and he asked him this question. And I thought that was a very profound and important question to ask this man, because the fact is, many people in our world have heard about Jesus, and they can spout off various things about Jesus. But Jesus doesn't just want us to know facts about Him. He wants us to have a relationship with Him. And my coworker was really trying to get this man to think about, who is Jesus to you? And I want you to think about that as I go through my presentation today, because what you will see is that Jesus, to many of our brethren all around the world, He is a reason to live and to love. He gives us purpose, and He gives us peace and motivation in this life that we will not find anywhere else. And I feel very convicted about who Jesus is in my life, so much so that Jesus is a reason for me to go 8,000 miles to the other side of the world to tell people about Him. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Ethiopia, I've got a little map here. You can see there's DFW. That's where we took off from. And Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as you can see here in the zoomed-in view, it's in the Horn of Africa, 8,000 miles as the crow flies. To get to Ethiopia takes us nearly a day and a half of traveling, and then additionally, however long it takes us to get out to the countryside villages, which is usually 6 to 7 hours by car on some very difficult roads. Now, I want to just give you some basic information about the country so that you can understand what we're getting ourselves into. Ethiopia is about twice the size of Texas, and it has about 4 times the population size of Texas. So it's a pretty big country with a lot of people living in it. And within this country, There are about 86 different languages. Now, I want you to think about this with me for just a minute. I'm not talking about dialects. It's not like when you go up north and you talk to somebody from New York and you ask them, are you actually speaking English? And it's just a different dialect. No, these are vastly different languages because Ethiopia is still very tribal, especially as you get out into these remote villages. And so people have very different communication styles, very different languages, and you can see how that would create some challenges for us as we're going out and we're trying to spread the gospel. Now, there is a national language called Amharic that many people speak, but even still, there are some places when we are 5 or 6 hours out into these remote villages where people do not speak Amharic. We have to use 2, sometimes even 3 translators to get the message across to them. This is a challenge, this is a barrier, but it doesn't stop us from going and preaching the gospel. I want you to notice also, literacy in Ethiopia is only about 50%. And what that means practically is that if I take a Bible and I hand it to 2 people, only one of them can read that. Now you can imagine again how that creates some significant challenges in the work that we are doing. And we've been brainstorming trying to figure out how do we alleviate this, because the fact is, you know as well as I do, we believe the power is in the Word of God. And if people can get the Word of God in their hands, it can change their life. But if they can't read it, what are we to do? We've been working on getting some audio Bibles and getting some translations that people can listen to. I'll have more to say about that in a minute, but you can see this is a challenge. But I also want you to notice that other statistic at the bottom. Ages 15 to 24, literacy is significantly higher in the younger generation. And that is because in the country of Ethiopia, they have made a significant push to educate their children, to educate the younger generations, to teach them English so that they can improve their infrastructure and really dig themselves out of this third world that they're living in. And what that has created for us is some significant opportunities among the younger generations, because here is a group of people who, many of them, are able to read and comprehend the things that we are saying, even in English. And so we've made a specific effort in this area that I'll have more to say about here in just a moment, that helps us address some of these challenges that we face as we are spreading the gospel. Now, religiously, Ethiopia is dominated by Orthodox religion, which is a lot like Catholicism here, and Islam. You notice there on that whole eastern side of Ethiopia, it's dominated by Islam, and some of it is radical Islam, the violent ones that you've probably heard about on TV. It's a little scary when I go over there sometimes because we see these fellas walking around with their weapons. And they have a big pull in this country. And so we are doing the best that we can, but we have some significant religious challenges that we are facing as we are going over there with these other groups who have a lot of sway and a lot of power there. And furthermore, while I'm talking about challenges, one of the most significant challenges in Ethiopia is getting around. Of course, if you've ever been to a third world country, you know this experience. Infrastructure in third world countries is very, very complicated. What might take us 1 hour to get from here to there might take us 3 to 4 hours because the roads are so difficult, because transportation breaks down or doesn't work or isn't that great. In fact, I've got a video here I want to show y'all. This is a typical countryside road, and this is one of the better roads that we travel in Ethiopia. Now, when you get out there, what you find is there's a lot of things sharing the road with you. You've got animals, you've got people, you've got donkey carts, you've got big machinery that often just breaks down and people just leave it there. You can see there's this road. I was very thankful for this road this year because typically there's potholes and you're going like this the whole time. And imagine doing that for 3 or 4 hours at a time. It wears you out. But this road was one of the better roads that we traveled. But you can see as we are going, because there's so many things on the road and there's not a lot of signs, there's not a lot of order, you just kind of have to navigate slowly and take your time. You get there when you get there. And you know, that's really contrary to our American efficiency. But I'll tell you, I learned a very valuable lesson through my time in Ethiopia, especially with their infrastructure. It's not always about the time it takes to get there. It's about the time you spend with the people. Because you know what one of the greatest blessings was as we were driving out into these remote villages on these difficult roads is we had some additional time with our brethren just to talk about the Lord and to be with them and to look into their eyes and get to know them a little bit better. We lose that that sometimes in our American culture. We are so busy and so worried about efficiency that we miss that faith is about relationships. It's about growing together in the knowledge of Christ in peace and purpose together. I really want to emphasize that. That's something that became very profound to me this year in my time in Ethiopia. Those brethren are so very different from us, but they love us because they love our Lord, just like you love the Lord, and that's what brings us together. So you can see there are many challenges that we face when we go into this work, and I don't share these things to complain or denigrate their way of living. I mean, the fact is they live very differently than us. But these are just realities that we must navigate as we're going out to do the work, and it doesn't keep us from going. We are still going to go into the world and preach the gospel, and God is still going to open up doors of opportunity for us to talk to people about Jesus because that's who He is. We simply must go, and we do go. And when we go, we have a solid group of people that I want to introduce you to. Well, here's some pictures I meant to show you as well. This is kind of what it looks like in the Ethiopian countryside. 5 people on a motorcycle. This was my record for this year. I would not recommend this. We drove beside this guy for a while, and I just kept waiting for them to tip over. But that's just their way of life. It's very different from ours. Now, when we go, we have a solid group of people that we work with that have been doing gospel work for many, many years. And I want to emphasize that because these aren't people that we have just met. These are men who've been preaching the gospel for some of them more than 30 years. And they are very established in this work. And so let me just introduce them to you briefly. The first man is Mesfin. That's his new wife, Gannett. Mesfin lives in the capital city of Addis Ababa. He works with a church called the Sephira Church. That has been in existence for about 15 years. Mesfin is a key man in our work because he speaks about 4 different languages. And he is from one of the regions that we spend a great deal of our time, the Hosanna region that I will tell you about. And so he is able to speak not just the general national language, but he knows the local languages as well. And so he is critical to us, to our being able to effectively communicate in these areas that we go. Next man is Tishala. Tishala is one of our translators. He works with a church called the Darame Church, and one of the southernmost churches that we work with in Ethiopia. He has 7 children and counting. That's his hobby, I think. But he's a very good man. One of the things I really appreciated about Tishala is he is very busy with the gospel work and always thinking about it, but he has not neglected his family. And I'll have more to say about that in a moment, but it is very evident that he is training his kids to know and serve the Lord. In fact, his oldest son joined up with us when we were in Addis, and he's working towards becoming a translator as well. And so I'm grateful for men like him who aren't just doing the work with the local church, but they are investing in their families and doing the same things that we're trying to do in our local churches as well. This young man is named Misgana. His name means praise. One of the cool things about Ethiopians is all of their names mean something. And they gave me a name this year. My name is Batimo. My name means replacement. I'll take whatever they give me, okay? But Misgana, he's a young professional. He's about 26 years old, and I invited him to join us this year. His father is a gospel preacher out in the countryside, and so he's very familiar with the gospel work, but he's currently working as a professional. But interested. He's very interested in getting more involved in this work. And there are a number of young men like Misgana who are young professionals, but who care about their faith and want to grow and develop the church. In fact, he and another man just recently, about 3 weeks ago, started a church in their area because there was not a church in this new area that he had moved to. And I've been talking to them constantly and having Bible studies with them. But anyways, I foresee that Misgana is going to be someone who is important and even critical in this work moving forward because he speaks multiple languages and he has a heart and a desire to do this work with us. This is Elias. Elias is probably the most important person in our work because he's our driver. And without him, we would not be able to navigate the places that we go. Elias cares very deeply about our safety. He tells us where we need to walk, where we need to look, where we need to put our wallets so that people won't steal our wallets from us. He is very overly protective of us, and he cares about us simply because we have come to share Jesus with people. I want to emphasize that to you because it's so important to see that here we are 8,000 miles from home. And yet people care about us, even if they don't know us, simply because we love Jesus. That's powerful, my friends. That's a powerful thought. And I wonder if we have that same kind of affection for one another, for people who serve and love Jesus as well. The final man I want to introduce you to is named Zerahun. And Zerahun is probably the key man in this work. In fact, I might argue that he is the man he's the reason that this work is even in existence. Zerahun has been preaching since probably he was in his 20s. I believe he's in his 60s now, so more than 40 years. He works with a church in the capital city of Addis called the Kotobi Church. And he organizes and plans most of the logistics of our trip. He is a well-respected man who people trust, and we can count on to always be there. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about him as I tell you the history of this work. I want to give you just some brief background just so you know this isn't a work that I began, but this is a work that I am continuing that began back in the 1970s. There was a couple named Faye and Dartha Starr. Now, Dartha is the man. I had some confusion about that too because those are some interesting names. Dartha moved to Ethiopia because he wanted to teach in the university. He and his wife were looking for a new adventure. And while they were in Ethiopia, they looked to attach themselves to a church, but they couldn't find any churches because no churches of Christ existed aside from these mission churches is what they were called. And essentially what a mission church was, it was a sponsoring church arrangement where there was this big compound that received money from American churches, and then they would send people out to preach. And you know as well as I do, one, that's not God's biblical model, but what's very interesting is that the Ethiopians learned very quickly that this model doesn't work and it quickly becomes corrupt. They actually learned the corruption of this system before they learned the biblical truths about this system. And so when Faye and Dartha Starr were in Ethiopia in the 1970s, they worked with this church that was part of the mission system, and they worked with Zerahun, who was a young preacher at the time. And they started teaching him. Now, Faye and Dartha Starr had to leave Ethiopia in the 70s because there was a revolution and all non-citizens were forced to leave the country. But they kept in contact over the years with the Ethiopians. And I believe in the 80s, after Dartha had died, Faye wanted to do something to help the Ethiopian brethren to continue to grow and develop. And so she got in touch with Bob Owen and David Pickup, David Pickup was a man who was doing some preacher training here in the United States. And she thought that would be something great to help these Ethiopian brethren learn and grow, especially men like Zerahun, who are trying to come out of this mission system and do things a very different way. And so with her help, there was the first group of Americans that went in 1999. David Pickup, Melvin Curry, and Bob Owen. 3 names I'm sure you have heard in some form or fashion throughout your time. And these men are the ones who began the work in Ethiopia by training preachers. And they learned pretty quickly. Those men, when they went, they were in their 60s. They realized pretty quickly they couldn't do this work. This is not an older man's game. And so they invited some younger men to come in, David Holder and Randy Harshbarger, who at the time were in their early 40s. And for 20 years, David and Randy came to Ethiopia year after year after year. Consequently, David Holder is my father-in-law, for those of you who don't know, and he preaches for the Castleberry Church over in the Fort Worth area. And for 20 years, these men studied and taught and moved their way out into the Ethiopian countryside. When they began this work, there were only about a handful of churches, maybe 20 churches, that were not connected to this mission system, that were trying to follow God's pattern for the church. And as they taught these men, these preachers, and as they pushed farther out into the countryside, the churches began to grow and multiply. And when I came for the first time in 2020, just before COVID, thank God, when I came for the first time, there were more than 300 churches that they had helped start and develop, and they are continuing to grow. And one of the things that they brought us into is this preacher training, where they would equip men to go out and to teach in their languages and to spread the gospel. And so when I came for the first time in 2020, I came with another man named Ryan Harrison, who is a deacon down at the University Oaks Church in San Antonio, Texas. And Ryan and I both felt very convicted about this work, realizing that this work needed to continue. and feeling like God had opened a door for us. We were hand-selected by David and Randy to continue this work because they realized they would not be able to do this work forever. And Ryan and I, after much prayer and consideration, we determined we wanted to do this together. And so we have a team that goes every year to Ethiopia to go preach the gospel. And we've been, since 2020, we've been 3 times now, and we have intentions of going back every single year. And when we go to Ethiopia, we have 3 very clear objectives. We go to encourage the churches, because the fact is, in these remote villages, sometimes they wonder if they're the only ones that are doing this. Perhaps we feel like that sometimes. We go out to encourage these churches, to tell them more about Jesus, and to just love on them. We teach the preachers. We have special times where we have them all come together to meet together with us, and we study through a book of the Bible. And we equip them with material so that they can go back into their churches to teach. And then we equip the next generation. Now, obviously, that's part of kingdom work, but I wanted to put that up here because this is a specific part of our focus in Ethiopia. Because again, as I mentioned, the younger generation is the ones who have the ability to read the Bible and teach the Bible, and we are wanting to equip them so that they can effectively teach in their own languages. And so that's something that I'll talk about here more in just a moment. But you can see our objectives are very simple. And so our game plan for this trip was like this. We were there a very short time this year. Typically our trips to Ethiopia are about 2.5 to 3 weeks. But we took 2 women with us this year. And quite frankly, we wanted them to have a good experience. And so we made this trip a little bit shorter. We didn't make as many stops as we normally would. We went to one location, and we kind of spread out from there. And so as you can see, we went down south to an area called Hosanna. We were there for 3 days teaching in the countryside. And then we came back to Hosanna, and we did what's called focus groups or youth events. I'll have more to say about that more in just a moment. Before making our way back up to the capital city of Addis to work with, or to visit with preachers and churches and do some encouraging there. Now, just for a frame of reference, the capital city of Addis is about smack dab in the middle-ish. And where we go to Hosanna is about a 6-hour car ride south, again, on these very difficult roads. But we go to this area because there are many churches in this area, and we have men who are able to speak in the local languages, who are able to interpret effectively for us. And so we have found a wide door of opportunity here to not only help the churches grow, but to continue to spread and to evangelize in this area. Now, when we go, we drive out into the mountains. Hosanna is, if you've ever seen pictures of Ethiopia, it's a beautiful country. And Hosanna is some of the most beautiful parts of the country, in my humble opinion. But we drive out there, and it's a long way out there. And this is typically how we are greeted. We pull into the countryside villages, and we have children chasing us. They are so eager to see us. They have their faces pressed up against the glass. I often wonder if this is what celebrities feel like when the paparazzi are peering in their windows. It's a little bit intimidating and overwhelming, but I can tell you, it's because they are excited and love us. They want us to be there. Now, when we go out into these countryside villages, we have a pretty regular routine that we follow, and so I won't go into the specifics of each day. If you'd like more of that, you can go read the blog that I wrote. That details a little bit more some of the things that we did. But we would show up to these villages to this excitement, and there would typically be a crowd already gathered waiting for us. Here, when we went to Moloto, there were about 300 people already gathered under this giant tent just waiting for us to show up. And what they're doing, they're praying. They're singing. They're encouraging one another. And I've got some singing here for you. This is from Bucha. I didn't ask if the sound worked here. It doesn't work here? Okay, well, I'll just skip that for now. That's too bad. Y'all have to get with me on that afterwards. The singing there is wonderful. They sing it all in unison, and they sing with such spirit and vigor. And many of their songs, every time they sing, I'm one of those kinds of people, if you can't tell. I want to be involved and engaged in whatever is going on. And so I lean over, and I ask my translator, what are they singing about? Because if I can't sing with my voice, I'm going to sing with my spirit at least, right? And it's interesting, whenever they are singing, many of their songs are about the mercy of God and the power of God and our need for God. Because as was mentioned during the time this morning of our reflection, during our Bible class, we were thinking about in Bible class about how sometimes people that have less than us, they have a greater awareness of what they are lacking. And I can tell you from experience, when you go to a place like Ethiopia, these people live with almost nothing compared to us. And again, I'm not trying to denigrate their way of life. It's just a reality. They are very aware of how dirt floor poor they are. And yet they also realize how incredibly blessed they are to know the God who is good, the God who gave them life, the God who gives them peace in a future that is better than this one. And let me tell you, my friends, we often miss that in our cushy chairs here in America. And listen, I'm not trying to rag on us. I wear a shirt and tie, and I sit in a nice seat whenever I go to church on Sundays. But I tell you what, these brethren in Ethiopia, they admonish us in many ways to really consider what it is that we are willing to do and what we are willing to give. Because to them, Jesus is not just something that they claim. Jesus is a reason for them to travel hundreds of miles even to hear the gospel. He is a reason to sit on the floor for hours and listen to someone share the gospel with them. Because they realize that Jesus to them is life. He's more than just a temporary fix or a feel-good person to know about. Jesus is life. And that's why you see such joy on their faces whenever we show up. Because they know when we go, listen, we're not there to do service projects. We're there to talk to them about Jesus. And oftentimes many people will follow us around from village to village. And listen, these villages aren't close. I talked to one guy who traveled over 1,000 kilometers to come hear what we had to say. That's about 620 miles. It cost him money. He took off of work. People do this regularly because to them, Jesus is everything. He is joy. Fellowship is meaningful. Listen, we as Americans, we need to see what these brethren are doing, not because they are better than us, but because they remind us of what faith is about. They remind us what fellowship really is about. We have been brought together by Jesus to have life and peace and purpose together. And individually. It is a wonderful thing to pull up and see these people living with nothing and yet living with such joy. I wonder if we have that kind of joy. And listen, they sit there on the floor and they pay attention. They are attentive. They aren't looking away. I mean, these people, they want everything that we have to say. And it's often in cramped spaces. As you can see, whenever we would get there, we usually started with a general assembly. And one of us would speak, and after we spoke, we had some breakout sessions. You can see here, the women and children went off into one room. I took the men into another room, and this was one of the most cramped spaces that we were in. Dimly lit rooms. I mean, they're trying to find the light so that they can read their Bible, but they are in there. In fact, by the time we finished teaching here at Bucha, in this little tiny room, I had men sitting at my feet because they just wanted to be in the room to share the fellowship, to hear the things that we were talking about. Now we did that for 2 days. We went out to the east, we went out to the west, to Bucha and to Molito. We encouraged these churches. Then we worshiped with them on Sunday. And then afterwards, we did what is called these focus groups. And focus groups are basically what I told you earlier. We identify young people in the churches. Well, we don't do the identifying. We let some of these local preachers and local men help us understand who are the young people who are active and involved in your churches that we could help teach and train. And we invite them to these focus groups in these different locations. And this year, we did 2 different focus groups. We did one in Hosanna, which is a college town. And then we did one in Durame, which is a couple hours south. And they also have a large young group of young people. And in both of these focus groups, we had about 200 people that came. And as you can imagine, when you get a bunch of young people together, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but there's also a lot of purpose because these people, they're idealistic and they see a lot of things very clearly in the season of life that they are in. And so for that reason, we are very deliberate with the time that we spend with them. I have another video of them singing. That's the group at Hosanna, the first one that I showed you. Let me see if I can go back. That's the group at Hosanna. You can see, again, a packed space. One of the things that impresses me, one, Ethiopians have no personal space, period, anyways. But they don't mind sitting in cramped spaces for long periods of time if they find it valuable. And that's one of the things, I think we would do well to learn from. They have in their minds already determined this is valuable. This is worth my time. Listen, if something is worth our time and attention, we'll spend the time. We'll deal with being uncomfortable, won't we? But do we have the mind that says this is worth it? These guys certainly do. And you can see here in Durrami, it was a similar situation. By the time we were done, we had people sitting on the floor in front of us. I had another video of them singing. Y'all have to listen. I'll make sure y'all have these available because the singing is incredible. Listening to them, listening to their spirit as they are crying out to God. It is a wonderful thing. And in this specific song that I had here played for you, the meaning of the song is we are going to magnify God's name. We are going to magnify His work, His mercy, and we want God to be magnified among us. Now, we have songs like that too. But do we mean it when we are singing, God, we want your name to be great among us as your people? So, these are the people that are your brethren. These are the people that we came to share the gospel with, and many of them traveled at their own expense to come and be with us. And I'll just tell you, consequently, these focus groups are part of what we use the funds that you gave me to do, because to host these focus groups requires money to rent the space, but we're also helping in some ways to give these people places to stay whenever they come, because they often come from very long ways away. And whenever they come, one of the things that we do is we make sure every single one of them has a Bible. Now, most of them do. And if they do, we give them a Bible still, and we say, this is for you to give to somebody else. We always make sure that they have a Bible, because most of these people are reading their Bible every day, and they're studying with somebody else. And so we make sure that they are equipped with the things that they need, but we also make sure they are equipped with understanding. The way that our focus groups typically work, we meet from about 10 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the evening. And we have some short breaks in there to drink some coffee, because when you're in Ethiopia, that's what you do. You drink coffee. But in the mornings, our sessions are very deliberate. We teach them through a text. So this year we taught them the book of James, because we want them to have notes to go back to their church to teach through a book and show them the process of Bible study. Because, something we take for granted is we can just get on Google and we can learn information about these different books of the Bible. They don't have access to those things. And if they do have access to it, it's usually not in their language. And so we give them handouts, which again cost money to get printed. We give them books and information to help them in their studies. We are trying to equip these people so that they can teach the gospel as well. And so in the mornings, we are solely focused on here's what the Word of God says, here's what it means, and here's what you can do with it. And in the afternoon sessions, we do some Q&A. We allow them to ask us questions about the text, anything that they didn't understand or would like clarification on. We also allow them to ask questions about anything else they might be studying. Now, that's a scary thing for me. I'll just be honest with you. I always tell them, y'all only ask me the easy questions. But they have lots of questions, because they are talking to people from other denominations. They're talking to other people from different faith groups. They have questions and things that they're wrestling with in the Scriptures. And so we make an effort to make sure that we spend time listening to their questions, because one, it helps us understand where they are. And it helps us understand what they need. And that's an invaluable time that we spend together with them. And it's wonderful. And as you can see just by the faces, again, these people are eager. They are excited. I want you to know there is a generation of people who love the Lord and who are eager to serve them. We see that sometimes here, but it's all around the world. Sometimes people decry what's happening to younger generations. And perhaps the world is going to pot, but you know what? The Lord always has people. And He will always have people who love Him and serve Him. And you have helped support these people and encourage these people by your involvement in this work. They are so glad that we come. And they are so glad that we have fellowship together in Christ. Now, after we finished our focus groups, we went back up to Addis, and we did something that we don't normally get to do. So whenever we go out on these countryside trips, it's a lot of blowing and going. We don't have a lot of time to sit down because we have a very short window and we want to be efficient with it. But this year we made some additional time to go and spend time with the men that we are doing this work with, to be in their homes, to be with their families, because we realize that Jesus to us is not just a reason to go and preach at them and leave. He's a reason to have community, to have fellowship, to know one another intimately. The fact is, I have no other reason to know these brethren 8,000 miles on the other side of the world except because of Jesus. And so I want to know them, and I want to spend time with them. And so that's exactly what we did. We were in their homes. We visited this man named Wubashet. Now, Wubashet is a man who worked as a translator for many years in this work, but now Wubashet is in kidney failure, and he is dying. We were able to be in his home and to encourage him. And you know what we saw whenever we were in his home? We saw joy on the faces of his children because brethren would come and they would encourage him and remind him that even though his outer self is wasting away, your inner self can be renewed day by day because of the hope that you have in Jesus Christ. We would go and we would visit the places where these people meet, like Zerahun and Adisay. This is where the Kotobi Church is going to begin meeting here very soon. They just recently purchased this property. They wanted to tell us about this. They wanted to share with us the growth of the church there in Addis and how the gospel is continuing to press out. We got to spend time with Tashala and all of his kids and his wonderful wife, and we got to see the fruits of his labor and how he, again, is doing the very things that we are trying to do over here to teach our families to know Jesus, because nothing else matters if they don't know Jesus. It's not just logistics that we're dealing with. We're dealing with eternity. We're dealing with things that matter. And we saw that in the faces of people like Mesfin and his wife Gannett and their 9-month-old baby Nathan. They love us because they love the Lord. And that is so important to fellowship. Because fellowship means nothing if it's not rooted in Christ and if it doesn't bring us together in harmony and unity and in peace. Because Jesus to us is a reason to love someone. You know, we have many pronounced differences. Our skin color, our economic situations, our language barrier. But we have one very important thing that has brought us together. And I began to understand the power of this fellowship when I went last year, actually, in January of 2022. I was supposed to travel with my friend Ryan, and he, for some reason, was not able to get his visa approved like he thought, and so I ended up making the trip from DFW to Addis by myself. And I was supposed to meet Randy in Addis, but Randy also had some issues with his visa. And so here I was on my second trip to Ethiopia. I had met these people once, and I had known them because I grew up hearing about these Ethiopian men. But I found myself in a very compromising and difficult circumstance, because when you're in a third world country where you don't really know anybody and you don't speak the language, the reality of if nobody chooses to talk to me, I'm just kind of stuck here, is kind of scary. And I found myself at the airport not really knowing anyone. And all of a sudden I get a phone call from Mesfin. It's the middle of the night, by the way. I landed at 1 o'clock in the morning, and Mesfin calls me. He says, Danny, he says, I was worried about you. I've been up all night praying for you. Are you here? Can I come and be with you? He wanted to come and be with me, and he came and sat with me. Zerahun called me. He had the same thing. These two men that I barely know personally were deeply concerned about me because I, like them, am part of Jesus' family. And therefore, we are family. See, they taught me some valuable lessons about fellowship. Fellowship is not just, I go to the right kind of church. Fellowship is we understand who Jesus is, and it changes who we are. It's got to be more than just understanding facts about Jesus. It's got to be realizing that He calls us to be something different. Let me offer you just 3 quick things that I took away from my time in Ethiopia, some key initiatives. Ryan Harrison, plan to go back to Ethiopia, like I said, every year. And we have 3 things that we are asking for both support and help in accomplishing. Some of these you've already heard about. We are trying to make Bibles readily available. One of the things that became glaringly obvious to us is that Bibles are difficult to get. Now again, I realize not everybody can read them. We're working on different options for Bibles, but we want to have funds and we want to have Bibles available so that if somebody calls me and says, hey, I need Bibles, I can say, you got it. They are right there. That's something that we are working on. Before I left this year, I bought about 500 Bibles with some of the money that you gave me. I left them about 500 Bibles. Some of them are in Addis, some of them are in Hosanna, and some of them are in another area called Yerugellum that we work in. And so, whenever someone needs Bibles, those are available. But that's an ongoing process that we need help and ongoing support for. We're also working on a Bible study website for these people. One of the things we realized was they have access to a lot of digital resources, but not digital resources in their language. And so we began a Facebook page this year because Facebook seems to translate easily between our culture and theirs, where we started giving them English Bible study material that they are now in the process of working to translate. But translation costs money. Translation requires time. And so those are things that we need continuing funding, continuing support for. We have some men who are willing to do it, but it just requires effort. But that's an initiative that we are working on currently. And then finally, we are working on some outreach. One of the things we found during our focus groups this year is that the people that we invited their friends. You know, wouldn't you? Go figure, right? Because they're interested and eager in their efforts, they're going to bring people. That was not what we expected necessarily, but we saw a great door of opportunity there. And so one of the things we're going to do in coming years is try to create more of these outreach events specifically geared towards people who do not know the gospel. Now, that's a lot on our plate because we are trying to continue to train preachers and help the churches be encouraged. But we feel like it's important to continue to push out and help this next generation push out with these sort of events. And so this is definitely on our radar as we continue in the future. Now, as I reflect on my time in Africa, I'm always struck by the gospel's ability to alter my life, to alter the lives of others. Especially this trip, I had more people ask me, why do you go 8,000 miles to the other side of the world? And as I mentioned, it's because of what Jesus has become to me. And the fact is, when I think about who Jesus is to me, He's a reason to go. Because that's what Jesus calls us to do, isn't it? Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And that's going to look differently for everyone. I realize not everyone is cut out or has the desire to go 8,000 miles from home and to work in Africa. But we are all called to go somewhere. Perhaps it's to go into your family and to teach your family. Perhaps it's to go down the street and talk to your friend. Perhaps it's to use that influence that you have in your job or in the community or wherever it is to broaden the borders of God's kingdom. Because my friends, Jesus to us is not just a name. He is our King. He is our everything. You know, as my coworker, my Ethiopian coworker, continued to have that conversation with that man that day. And he asked him, who is Jesus to you? The man kind of stumbled through some things that were very profound. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Savior of the world. But my friend followed up with this question, and I want to offer this to you as a means of invitation this morning. He asked him this: who are you to Jesus? Because whatever we understand Jesus to be, it is irrelevant if we don't do anything with it, if it doesn't change us. Because the fact is, Jesus came down from the glories to heaven, took on our form, took on our weaknesses. God so loved us that He gave us Jesus. He gave us so much. How could we simply just sit back and revel in that grace and say, well, thank you? Obviously, He wants more from us. Who are you to Jesus? You see, this walk of faith is a calling, it's a challenge, it's a lifestyle. It's an identity. Because of who Jesus is, we must be different. That's why He came to this earth. That's why He died for our sins. That's why He continues to love and lead us, because fellowship is family, and He wants us to be with Him by walking with Him in obedience, just as He walked with God in obedience. And so that's the invitation for you this morning. Perhaps you are not walking in obedience with God. Perhaps Jesus to you has simply just been a name. Or perhaps you have never accepted Jesus as your King. Let me tell you, my friends, there is nothing in this world as powerful as knowing the love and the leadership of the one who died for you and who wants you to be part of His family. If you are looking for peace and purpose in your life, you can find it when you give your life to Jesus Christ by being buried with Him in the waters of baptism, being raised to walk in newness of life where there is peace and there is hope, there is a future, there is a community, and we are family. That is the gospel message. Perhaps you need to respond to it this morning. If I can help you to do that, I'll be down here at the front to encourage you while we stand and sing this invitation song.